Soma's preference for aquatic habitats is a characteristic that essentially eliminates all of the formerly proposed Soma plant candidates, especially ephedra, the joint pines, because these are arid land plants. There are, however, two riverine plants of the Punjab and the Indian subcontinent that figure prominently in Indo-Aryan traditions, and both of these aquatic plants produce white latex from both creeping and upright stems. These would be the famous peepal tree, a species of fig tree from India, Ficus religiosa, which is a highly revered plant by both Brahmanic and Buddhist traditionalists. But just as well, we might consider the celebrated sacred lotus of India, a plant that is symbolic of most Vedic gods and goddesses, and a plant that grows on the banks of rivers and lakes, and not infrequently in close association with the peepal tree. Asian lotus plants grow on shorelines with both erect and creeping stems. So both of these plant species, the fig and lotus, are worthy of a little more detailed consideration here. So let's take a look. The peepal, or peepali tree, which is revered throughout India and Southeast Asia, and at least in times past, typically thrived on the banks of rivers and standing bodies of waters. Big trees require lots of water. And the fig trees of India are some of the largest trees in the world in terms of their canopy size. In the olden days, mature fig trees were monumental in stature. But since most Asian forests near rivers today have long since been cut down to make room for rice paddies, villagers, and overflowing human populations, most peepal trees are now encountered inside temple grounds, where they serve as a reliable source of shade for devotees of Hindu and Buddhist deities, and often as living altars. Here we observe, for example, life-sized golden Buddhas, each striking a particular pose or signaling a hand gesture that represents a critical phase of a Buddha's lifetime. This scene comes from Wat Hai Sok, in the heart of the capital city of modern Laos, a Buddhist country. As is typical of tropical fig trees, they often develop secondary roots from stems and trunks that creep downward to the earth to root themselves. So conceptually, you might say these trees have both erect and creeping stems. Peepal trees produce a thick canopy of distinctive heart-shaped leaves with a long and prominent extended blade tip. Very, very unique. And canopies filled with these broad leaves create a very cool, shady retreat from the heat of tropical suns in South Asia. Hence their popularity in cities and among holy sites. If you pluck a leaf or cut into a peepal tree trunk, the plant immediately produces an abundance of sticky, viscous, milky latex. And since peepal trees tend to occur on riverbanks, they share a close ecological association with the other potentially relevant plant in our search for Soma, this being India's sacred lotus, whose once vast, expansive groves were a common feature of riverbanks and lakes throughout India, including those that occur in valleys of the Himalayan mountains. What we observe in a lotus patch are large, emergent, umbrella-shaped leaves and flowering stalks that ascend from creeping, swollen, starchy stems that pervade the muddy substrates of riverbanks. Flowering lotus stalks of the Punjab tend to arise in multitudes during the late summer and early fall, during which seasons they produce white or reddish blossoms, pinkish blossoms that are as large as the palm of a man's hand, if not larger. Their thick and hidden subterranean stalks form a thick labyrinthine web of stems underneath the water, each new runner producing around 7 sequential large and showy flowers over the brief course of a flowering season. Not unlike stems of the peepal tree, both the emergent and submerged stems produce a milky latex that froths from the stems and leaves when cut due to the sap's viscosity. The thicker underground stems are often harvested to boil like potatoes to be eaten with meat, while the flowering stalks are often harvested as altar offerings. The milky latex is apparent to anybody that detaches any piece of this plant. Now, it is noteworthy that both of the Soma plant candidates, discussed thus far, the peepal and lotus, have long enjoyed a defined status among the gods of Aryan tribes, the so-called Indo-Aryan peoples of South Asia. The earliest known Buddhist temples, for example, known as stupas, are covered, literally covered with images of lotus flowers strewn across altars that are placed beneath peepal trees. Because both of these plants were present when the last Buddha personally experienced enlightenment, some 2,400 years ago, or so the story goes. But these particular images date to around 2,300 years ago, and they are rarely given any consideration by Vedic specialists, based on the assumption that the Soma sacrifice was a prehistoric practice and was therefore irrelevant to Buddhist traditions or traditionalists. But in fact, the historical record suggests otherwise, a point we shall discuss in detail in our episode on Buddhism. And just as a reminder, the Buddhist pantheon is the prehistoric Vedic pantheon. A much older image of the lotus and peepal symbolic configuration is observed, interestingly, on a small stele unearthed from the Indus River Valley from strata that date from about 4,000 years ago. This moment being contemporaneous in time and place with the Vedic singers, the original sacrificers of the Soma plant. On this seal we observe a flowering lotus stalk with its prominent obconical seed receptacle, pitted seed receptacle, over which 7 peepal leaves cast their shadows. 2 cosmic bull images with extended necks flank the lotus stalk. The inscription at the base of the seal, identified as the Indus River civilization script, has yet to be deciphered. The so-called Indus River civilization, sometimes referred to as the Harappan civilization, flourished from about 4,500 years ago to 3,500 years ago. So this would be India's prehistoric period. The culture developed and sustained urban centers that were equal in size and general organization to contemporaneous cities of the Sumerians. That would be in Mesopotamia during this time period. This Indus River civilization is known to have occupied all regions of the Punjab during this age, and also the banks of the Indus River southward to the Arabian Sea. It's been estimated that the larger cities of the civilization supported as many 50,000 inhabitants, and there were many cities. This was India's first civilization, and it collapsed into fragmented populations around 3,500 years ago for reasons that are still unclear. Many historians now suspecting that an extended dry period may account for the demise of this once flourishing civilization. But the most controversial historical issue involving this period of Indian history relates to the question as to whether the Vedic singers were a significant part of the cultural fabric of these early Indian city-states and this great civilization, or not. Heated debates continue to rage on the issue, and both sides are pretty insistent in their opposing views. some insisting that the Aryans were not even in the region at the time, and others insisting that the entire civilization basically represents the Aryan people. Perhaps we'll find some time in the future to explore this issue on Paradise Earth. But for the moment, what is clear to me, at least from the archaeological remains of the Indus River civilization, is that various symbolic images unearthed from the banks of the Indus River during this time period are perfectly compatible with Indo-Aryan mythic and doctrinal themes, the very themes that define Vedic traditions. For example, a large number of dice have been disinterred from Harappan sites, as have seals that bear the mark of the swastika. Both of these emblems are well-known symbolic tokens of Indo-Aryan culture. In fact, the use of dice is mentioned frequently in Vedic hymns, just as the roll of dice set into motion one of the most cherished mythic tales of classical India, and that would be the Mahabharata, an epic myth, which is thought to have been authored around 2,300 years ago. And the swastika, a symbol of Brahmanism's creator as an unmoved mover, was no doubt in Aryan use during prehistoric time periods. We know that the Asian lotus figured importantly in early Indus River mythology on the basis of the aforementioned seal with a lotus flower that bears extended bull heads under a peepal canopy of leaves. Clearly, this piece has some sort of religious or mythic meaning. The intriguing imagery on that seal complements a peculiar prehistoric ceramic from the Indus River at this time, which is actually clearly a lotus flower receptacle. A hole that was placed underneath the object was probably fitted with a stick for some sort of ritualistic purpose. Whatever its use, it gives us to know that the sacred lotus of the East was, in fact, a prominent vegetative feature of wetlands on the Indus River in prehistoric times. And in this light, it is worth mentioning here the degree to which South Asians have conserved their religious traditions and symbols. For what other tradition in human history has taken the time and effort to preserve a corpus of many thousands of prehistoric hymns by word of mouth for 4,000 years? In this light, the religious traditions of India are without peer. They're conservative. And fortunately for us, in our quest to unravel the mystery of Soma's identity and the underlying meaning of myths in the Vedas, the use of symbolism and iconic imagery of ancient India, it turns out, has been preserved just as diligently as their use of religious chants and scriptures. Whether Vedic bards formed a part of the Indus River civilization or merely coexisted on the margins of the civilization's most impressive urban centers, is still an open question. But either way, remnants of iconic forms in the visual arts of the Indus River civilization do indicate that both the riparian peepal tree and the aquatic lotus plants figured prominently in religious symbolism during this time period, which I might remind is an age in which Vedic bards were actually composing their hymns to Soma and establishing their priestly protocols for the benefit of future generations. Now that we are familiar with former attempts to identify the Soma plant, let's return to our treasure trove of Vedic hymns to seek out additional and more detailed information on the Soma plant and the use of the plant's invigorating drink.